Hello, everyone. My name is Olivia Estelle, and I am here today doing a very special collaboration that I am very excited about. And we are here just having a conversation. We wanted to each tell a little bit about our stories and have a conversation about healing. So.
Thanks, Olivia. Hi, everyone. I'm Becc. If you don't know me, I'm a spiritual teacher and a channel for love and a survivor of this mkultra, Monarch Programming, whatever you want to call that. So like Olivia said, we're here wanting to talk about the process of healing, I think, and coming from that kind of extreme suffering, really, to the transformation that can be, you know, even if you haven't had that experience, it can be a gift for everybody. There are elements of it that you'll probably relate to, and healing is so important, especially right now. So
Exactly.
mm-hmm.
So you're an mkultra survivor, and I'm an mkultra survivor, and we just realized a lot of similarities with our story, as well as even if they're a little bit different, I think it's very important to know about how these things are connected. Ultimately these things are connected, and you know, whether it's, you know, human trafficking, mkultra, satanic ritual abuse, or, you know, the secret space program, there is kind of an underlying connection between these things. And we really feel like, you know, we were talking about how we feel like this stuff is all coming up to the surface now. We can kind of feel it in the world. And so we just decided that it's important to talk about our stories and perhaps help people, even if they're just coming into the subject, help people understand healing from trauma.
Yeah, it's really important right now, guys. Like, when it comes up to air, it can be really almost traumatic to learn that kind of reality of the world.
Definitely.
And it's important that people realize that even though there's such like darkness, hello kitty, kitty's there if you guys can see that. She's so beautiful. It's important that we recognize that there can be light as well, you know, in the face of that, because we have our human reactions and our survival response, whether you're a survivor or not. Just hearing about that is stressful at minimum.
Exactly. It's very very just slimy. It can I don't know the exact term for it, but it can almost secondary trauma sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's the term. Yeah.
Is it? Yeah, it's like just by hearing about it can be really traumatic. So, you know, our goal is to talk about this in a way that gives it, I guess, a little bit of light. So we can talk about the reality of it, but how to use it for healing, and what going through trauma ultimately means for the soul. Right?
Yeah, I agree. And what that sort of makes me think about is how, and this is that wound that I think everyone can relate to. There's probably more, but what I think of is that what these programs do, these great darknesses do, their intention with the child that they're doing that to or whatever, is to disconnect spirit, like your essence, disconnect you from who you are and your ability to express that. And like, I'm getting chills right now because that's, you know, my healing transformed into being able to do that again. But it was such a process that I learned so much along the way. But yeah, that's what trauma does, is that it disconnects you. We've all had like traumatic experiences.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it feels like it's, you know, one's bigger than the other. It's not. It's
right.
If there's that disruption, I would call that trauma.
Right.
And it's just, you know, humanity's waking up now, and we're returning to that spirit.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That was the ultimate goal that I just kept coming back to, and I'd be like, okay, what were these people doing? Why, you know, what were their intentions? And it really was to just keep the child's resonance very low, like a funnel. So if they could funnel the resonance down really low, then they could control it, because they were already so low in vibration and frequency. And so ultimately that is really what trauma does, is kind of reroutes the vibration.
So do you want to share a little bit about your story of that experience happening to you, and kind of maybe weaving into your healing process as well? I'm really curious to know as well.
Yeah, so it's always hard for me to know where to start.
Yeah,
Honestly.
I get that.
Yeah, and so I think I usually kind of just start in the middle and skip around, but something that I can say is that it started almost right away. I mean, right away as a child, as a baby. And my stuff was more, I want to say, energetic at first. Like I would have, because of what my family, actually what my grandfather was involved in, and my great uncle and his sister, you know, they were in Los Alamos, and my grandfather was he was an army intelligence and worked with the DIA and CIA. And we just knew very little about him. Like he would be gone from my family for like 9 months at a time. They weren't really allowed to know. So it was just an odd childhood that my mom grew up with, being on bases and army bases all around the world, actually. And she has some very creepy stories, odd stories of being a child, and, you know, someone coming downstairs, and she was downstairs talking to someone, and the window had been pushed in, but she didn't remember anything. You know, these kinds of little pieces. And so this is, you know, and both of my parents are very, very mainstream, like Christian, like not open to really any of this, not open to looking at any of this. And so it makes for a very compartmentalized existence. And I know a lot of people are like, well, what do your parents think? So they weren't really involved. I wouldn't say that I was part of generational ritual abuse, or generational satanic abuse, even though it really was, because this was handed down, and I was targeted because of my mother and grandfather, you know? So that is, you know, a little bit of the background there. But and I have my letter, actually just found it, and I found it odd that my parents kept this letter that I received I went to a public school, and it was postmarked on my exact birthday when I turned 6, that I had gotten into, you know, this gifted talented program, but I really wasn't quite in. They were like, she might be in, she might not be, we think she has potential, she's okay, so we're going to need to work with her, is that okay? And so my parents gave permission. So, you know, so it kind of strokes the ego, like your kid is special. Well, they could be special. You could let us do what we want to help her be special, right? That was how it was presented. And so I know they had something that they sent back. It was some kind of permission. And so I was taken out of out of public school and put into these gifted, talented programs, which I know they still have in public school, but I would say that these were very different than what they have now. And I could be wrong. I do think that this stuff is still going on. I just don't think that every gifted, talented program is involved in this. So I just wanted to make sure I said that. But mine ended up, I can't remember any of my early gifted, talented classes. And I have a very good memory. So I remember having to go back to get these memories of what were they doing? Like what, and every day started out with this sort of meditation that I realized. And it kind of,
That program,
yeah.
they would do a meditation in the program with you.
Yes.
How interesting.
And it was in public school, right?
Yeah.
Like so not
What?
normal. And
Yeah.
so it was, I think the meditation was, they would call it something to make it not seem like meditation. I think it was stories with holes.
That is also vaguely creepy. What does that mean?
I know, it is kind of creepy. I think it just put us, from what I am remembering, it put us into like this state where we can fill in the blanks in these stories.
Okay.
With our own, our own subconscious, our own superconscious, really, because we were so young. Mm-hmm. And that would alter our consciousness, that put us in a different state of consciousness for the rest of the class.
Wow.
And so it turned into like a ritual. That's how each class would start. And then the stuff that they would do in the class where, I remember one time doing, they would practice like levitating.
What?
Stiff as a board, like that, light as a feather, stiff as a board. Like, this is in public school. Like, what were they really trying to do?
Wow, like getting you to levitate or getting objects to levitate, or both?
Yeah, so it's this game is how it was presented, where we all got around a person, put 2 fingers under them. It was actually, they were sitting in a chair, put 2 fingers under the chair and focus and concentrate and see if we could lift the chair.
Oh my God.
2 fingers, right? And so it was just blatantly obvious.
Yeah, I just can't even with how they they'll take something, they can make it so like shady, but also totally innocent. And that's how they that's just so everyone knows, that's how they get away with it. Everyone's probably looking around like, how do they keep doing this human trafficking? That's the question that you get asked as a survivor, or the doubt comes into people's mind is, how can they be doing this? And it's because it's everywhere, but it's just masked like pretty perfectly. And everyone is so spiritually disconnected that they're not going to think anything of levitation because we're not a spiritual society. So
exactly. And so it's
going to be like, oh, what a kid's game.
Right. And it's an innocent game, like nothing to see here, but really why is this being done? And these kids whose IQs they've been targeted, like heavily targeted. Yeah. So they call it an IQ test, the way to get in. They called it an IQ test. But one of the questions that I didn't even remember, my brother actually reminded me of this, but one of the questions is they gave you a piece of construction paper and scissors, and they go, cut out a shape.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right?
What?
All I can think of is that is remote. It was remote viewing. Like they had a shape that they wanted
to get you to cut.
Yeah, so they would try and see which kid's shape matched their envelope. You know how like remote viewing, they'll have like a sealed envelope, and then they draw a picture, and they open the envelope, and it's like, okay. And so of course they didn't. I don't remember them telling us about that, but I know that that's what they were doing. And I know that the IQ test was actually a psychic ability test.
Mm-hmm.
So they were just really trying to find these psychic children, put them in a classroom, and really just experiment, see what they could do. And we did a lot of writing. So it was almost like they wanted to see what kind of came out of us. Like what were we writing about? What subjects? Later on, we studied Atlantis, the lost city of Atlantis.
What a coincidence.
Right? It's just so odd. I mean, they did like ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, the lost city of Atlantis.
Right, that's it. Then them doing it again, guys, is just like dotted in to like a normal subject matter.
Right.
You know, dot the magic and the spirituality, or occult rather.
Right.
In. And it's fine.
Right. It's an ancient mystery, right?
Yeah, that's all.
We just
don't worry about it.
Squeeze it right in there. Like
Wow. So what ages was this? Was this like
all through elementary school, starting at age 6, starting age 6 on. And I actually remained in the program for a much longer time than I would have hoped. I mean,
Mhm.
I remember this is a weird memory, but I remember being let go at about age 16, 15, or I think it
Mhm.
was 16. And because I could no longer hear the tones. Before I could hear like sounds only dogs could hear.
Wow. Yeah.
And then once I stopped being able to hear those. I remember having this, and all I could consciously remember was just this weird feeling of rejection.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
started like gaining weight. I started being really unhappy, and I had no idea why.
This is so crazy because a similar thing happened to me. It was around age 16, and then I started to fall apart in, or things.
Yeah.
Before that, I was like, for example, before that, I was really good at school and really social and blah, blah, blah. And then after that, suddenly I was depressed and like, I thought, I
Right.
was like, thought I had like bipolar or something. Like, it was just, anyway.
Yeah.
Wow.
Me too. And it went into like eating disorders later,
Yeah. Yeah.
college, and it was like, and why? And I remember being really unhappy and feeling really bad, but having nothing bad to
Mm-hmm.
say that I could remember at that
Mm-hmm.
time. I remember feeling like I got to college and I was like, wow, I've been raped. And then I was like, no, I haven't. Why am I lying about that? And just being really confused.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me it was an energy, and it was something that happened out of time, out of,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was completely compartmentalized, but that it started bleeding through that way, where I was
Yeah.
like, have I been tortured? Have I been raped? Like, all of it felt so real, and I could not figure it out, and I thought that I was just lying for attention.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
that's so painful.
right, yeah. And so I really, it was like I just kind of self-censored that way,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I didn't have any framework. And that's really like how it kind of like started coming up, when I was like, why am I bulimic? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what am I
Mm-hmm.
so afraid of? It didn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. And this is a good example again, just for everyone watching, is like that this is why survivors tend to talk about a process of recovering memory, but more than that, this is the expression of or the effect of dissociation, whether that's from the extreme torture that happens, and dissociation is disconnect from now, which is a survival-based mechanism that any of us would go into when we're in a trapped situation and we're too small to fight, and fight and flight aren't doable. That's what we use. And with that dissociation, because the experience is so overwhelming and unresolvable because you're being tortured or whatever, it gets suppressed to protect you. That's the survival mechanism. So just want everyone to get, like, that's why you end up with maybe the bleed through, like Olivia's talking about, like you're talking about, of like, I have this feeling of rejection, or I have these behaviors of an eating disorder, but no context, because knowing that is really threatening and overwhelming to deal with. And until you have like the required sort of safety and resources and things like that, they're not going to naturally come back to heal. Like, that's kind of the survival mechanism, wants to protect you.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I can relate, like that was my experience too.
Right.
So you had that, and then
Yeah. So what was really interesting too, so several things were going on. I was in the gifted talented program where I lived. And
mm-hmm.
then we would go every summer to Los Alamos to visit my uncle who worked in the underground base.
Whoa, that's
Yes.
normal.
Right. And my aunt, was the postmaster of Los Alamos. I mean, just not normal things. So we would go there every summer, and I would
Is
have
Los Alamos a base or?
the Los Alamos
Okay.
National Laboratory. And so
Oh,
it's
okay.
in the city of Los Alamos. And I think at the time, like early on, I think he would have to meet us, like the city was gated, like we couldn't even get in, because it was just, the whole city
Yeah.
was like this base. So we would go out to this place called Chama, actually, and there were cabins out in the woods where you would feed deer from your hand. And it was this fun, summer vacation, but that's where I started noticing missing time. I clearly remember waking up, sitting on the wooden floor and wondering why I had like eczema on my inner thighs. Like what is this? And being like, this is really weird. Like what happened last night? And I would remember deer looking in the window and just weird at night, just weird things. So my missing time started there. We went to a cave one time out in the middle of nowhere because I liked rocks. So they were like, oh, you should go to this mine. We pulled up to this cave. We get out and look at this cave, we're looking at this cave and I'm like, I do not want to go in there. And then the next thing I remember is we're back in the car driving away.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense with this type of experience.
Right, stuff like that. And so that is what I would remember. And that was going on like in the summers, while through the school year, I would be in this program. In second grade, I believe, I had this very suspicious student teacher who would take me out of recess and interview me and record my answers, in-depth questions about my life, like at home, my home life.
What?
I would read books. I know. I would read books and she would record it and send it off somewhere. And I have no idea. And she would say things to me, weird things. Like she knew I was really into the rainforest. And she would say things like, well, you know that Burger King is made from rainforest meat. Or something like I had just eaten Burger King. And then she would say things to like, and I thought I loved her. So this is a really weird thing. I'd be very confused because I'm like, I thought you were so sweet and I thought that I loved her, but she would say things to like make me feel disgusted. Yeah. And that's when I started realizing, okay, this is a weird situation. And that's kind of what started tipping it off. And I started realizing that, okay, she's intentionally trying to kind of lower my vibration because I was just so like, like children are. And so it was intentionally being like dampened. And those are things that I have always remembered that were just odd.
And you had these realizations about it looking back and kind of working out what her intention was.
Right. Because I always remembered those parts. They just never made sense. But they made perfect sense in the context of when the compartmentalized memory started coming out.
Yep, that's what it's like. It's like you just have all this stuff, and then once you can get the frame, it's kind of like bringing the skeleton or the frame back. Right. You can kind of look around the room of your story and be like, OMG, and see so much more for like things you thought were normal that were actually very odd, and like the weaving in of the, the dotting in of the occult and making it look normal. And
exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of how it all started coming through. And then I remember, the Los Alamos piece was the secret space program, and I was being used for telepathy, psychometry, remote viewing, really everything. And then they would put us into classifications. And I'd stay in bunk beds for, it would feel like months, but it would really be like minutes that would pass in time. So there was the ability to like pull out of time somehow and then just draw back in. And I would be like, why did my childhood feel so long? Things like that. There's tons of experiments, like this stuff I would remember, just a bunch of experiments being drilled in it, it was like they were trying to suck out either psychic ability or my empathy or DNA through the bone marrow.
Wow.
And it was like I was drilled into, third eye was drilled in. I mean, it was just, and so there was that kind of torture type of thing going on.
Yeah.
As well, on top of being trained for remote viewing, which sometimes felt like torture. So I would get really easily frustrated. I was in piano lessons, in my other life,
Yeah.
And I would get really frustrated, overly frustrated, and wonder why I would get so overwhelmed and not able to focus and concentrate. Because in
Mm-hmm.
school, I would be, I was like really straight A student. I was a really perfectionist. That was my thing. And it made
Mm-hmm.
sense when the memory started coming back, especially as I started to psychically develop. When I started
Mm-hmm.
working on that, then a program came up where I remembered, I think it was right before I was being let go, they had to like deprogram me sort of.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was set up. They were setting me up for failures, like for psychic things that I used to be very good at. They would just be screaming at me like, "No, you're lying!" And I had this trauma, and
Mm-hmm.
as well as them just sitting across from me, reading a hypnosis script
Yeah.
to you will remember nothing, not to be psychic. If you start, your psychic abilities will be blocked. So everything was put in there as an intentional block, and it was intended to just shut all this stuff that they built up, they then shut
Mm-hmm.
down.
Yeah.
And I was put back and kind of like dropped, like rejected. I mean, they have still followed and checked in on me throughout the years and tried to keep my vibe low, and I was supposed to follow like a path of alcoholism, and that is when
Mm-hmm.
I snapped out of it. That's when I kind of snapped the rubber band and everything came rushing back.
Mm.
So
It just came rushing back
that's kind of how
after
it
that period.
started. I was like, okay, I just started getting,
It's amazing.
yeah, well, I was fascinated with reading about this, and then I was like, why am I so fascinated? Because I would read about it and then I would see it in my head. I
Yeah.
was fascinated with Los Alamos underground base, Dulce underground base, and I would see pictures that I was reading about in my head, and I would
Mm-hmm.
ignore it because I always do that. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is what I've
Because
always
that's because I'm reading. Like I'm just
done.
reading about it. So
And I
yeah.
didn't know at the time that is as a psychic ability, because I
Mm-hmm.
was that disconnected. And then
Mm.
two, I didn't realize that was how memories were coming through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So what made you really realize like this is what happened when that was coming through? Did you eventually just kind of be like, wait, this did happen? These are memories. What was it like for you?
that's, I think I did a regression and then realized it all like opened up, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
these aren't just me seeing
Yeah.
things. These are
Yeah.
actual memories, or like actual remote viewing, of what they're talking about, because I have been there
Mm-hmm.
in a
Mm-hmm.
psychic capacity, like that kind of a thing. And so that's how I got in. Regression really helped me, and so that's how I got into it. And when I trained, you just do regression after regression, and it all
Mm-hmm.
just started, I was like, okay,
Wow.
yeah.
And how was that when it all came? I know for me, getting the memories back was almost its own trauma in a way, realizing that this darkness has happened to you. You know, there's for me, there's like some grief about like the loss of your innocence and just all different things. But yeah, how were you coping with that when that happened?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say lots of grief, and it was hard to not go down a self-destruction path,
Yeah, yeah.
and to really just, it was kind of, it put me into kind of a depression phase,
Mm-hmm.
like grief, lots of anger. I had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
anger where I was just
Yeah, me too.
really, really angry, and my
Yeah,
energy was really angry, but it was really covering up sadness. That was ultimately
yeah.
what my anger was doing. So, yeah.
Wow. So then you started doing regressions and things, and I guess this is where you kind of moved more into beginning to heal and things like that.
That's where I started. I mean, I would say my psychic development is in working with,
Mm-hmm.
my like psychic mentor, like just getting into that spiritual side, bringing it all back. brought the memories back. And so it's like I wouldn't do it for that reason. I was doing it to reconnect, but building up the energy, getting strong enough in my life really allowed me to be able to get more memories back and handle it in a safe way.
Yeah.
Without, you know, because, you know, some people I don't think, you know, if you don't have a good solid foundation of strength, you know, that's why your mind compartmentalizes. So that's what I think, you know, the psychic development was really the most important thing for that for me. Is that how you felt?
No. I'm just remembering how I basically had a breakdown when it happened with the memories coming back. I just could, like, I didn't have, you know, that makes sense with what you're expressing, that you kind of had those resources that we mentioned in a way to be able to manage. I didn't have resources, so I ended up developing like that kind of resource. You know, I just had like a whole experience. I can share like on my, you know, if I start talking about that, it's going to go into my story.
Yeah, I would like to hear your story now too. I don't want to just keep on going on too long, because we could really go on all night.
So I was born into a satanic ritual abuse family, generational type of situation, meaning that the grandparents had been doing it, and probably their grandparents, I don't know how far, I sense a long time. I had those connections that Olivia mentioned, which is like my dad was in the Navy, and his grandparents were both in the Navy, one like as a nurse, and I don't know what the other one was. And then on my mom's side, she was like a Christian, and we were like a Christian family. It's just, you can't help but laugh, guys. Like you just know what else to do. And there was my mom was, her parents rather were Freemasonry. They had a connection to that. So at the time, this was all, you see how all that's just like chill and just like, you know, fine. But talking in the context of what we're talking about today, everyone watching is probably like, oh, I get it, you know. So that was kind of the connections. So basically my life growing up kind of looked like these people, I had like owners and trainers. They kind of own you, and you comply, because every night I was tortured and abused. My father was pedophile. There was also like, I don't know what the right words is, but like a pedophile ring that was sort of would happen at various places in the local area for the pedophiles in there. And so, and my parents, they also had a connection to that company called Amway. I don't know if anyone's heard of that, but if you research that plus like satanic ritual abuse, they have a connection. So they would have these little parties for that business thing, or they would have like church group at home, these things at home. And then after, like, you know, so and so would leave, the pedophile people would stay, and that's when they would just, you know, kind of use me and other children, like people I grew up with. And yeah, it was really insidious and really painful. And what else?
Wow.
Yeah, so the satanic ritual abuse side, it looks like it was a matriarchal coven, which my mother was like a leader person of. I should also say that the mkultra or Monarch Programming, they all kind of interweave, so I'm not sure what words to use for everything, but like, yeah, what I want to say is that my dad, we would go to the bases that were underground, just like, you know, Olivia's experience, but it would be like I think it was like beneath their Navy base in the area. And I was being trained to be like a psychic, I don't know, like assassin or a psychic, just like a spy or whatever. The same kind of test that Olivia experienced, of like testing your psychic skills and training them, but mixed with like, I had the failure thing, because if I failed, you would get tortured.
Yeah.
And like that's what they said, like if you fail, this is going to happen to you and make you watch another kid being tortured. So
right.
You kind of, I have this memory of like having this this like goggle thing. I don't know what to call it. Like it almost looks like one of those optometrist things that you go to, but not.
Yeah.
Like it's this thing, and it was like on my head. It was like on my eyes, and I was using telekinesis, and I was levitating something, and this memory is just me feeling like that fear of failure.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was really telekinetic, and channeling as well was my really strong gifts. That this was really useful for the satanic people to, I was forced to channel like dark beings who were not always like to the coven. They like have specific deities that they are like wanting to be in contact with and do sacrifices for and so on, to get like power and energy. It's like it is like a religion, in a really messed up way. And but I have this memory of the what I told you about already, Olivia, but of being sort of, there was like a sacrifice happening, and this being was this reptilian being. I could see him clairvoyantly, and he was kind of there watching, and no one else could see. And he was like, first he was like feeding, and then I intuitively knew he was about to like try to get into my body and do the channeling thing, because all the people were gathered around like getting ready to talk to their god like through me.
Right.
And but instead it was like this reptilian being, but they think that they're channeling like fill in the blank god through me or whatever. But he was just taking advantage of the situation. So that's kind of that ET element that is a part of this, where when there's that kind of darkness and stuff, it feeds these beings, and they just like taking advantage of the situation. So yeah, the satanic side of things was kind of like a coven, and I was being trained to be like I guess like a priestess or a channel.
Were they trying to channel that reptilian being specifically, or was he pretending to be someone else?
He was pretending to be like whatever god it was. I can't remember what god they wanted to be channeling.
Okay.
This was like their regular time to like connect to so and so god, and to sit down and do that. And I just, yeah, and this was when I was like 7, guys, by the way. Like they start really young.
Wow. And that's really interesting that they thought, it's like they thought they were doing one thing and didn't realize how devolved and how dark it really was, maybe. And they just,
yeah, I mean, it was devolved and dark. They were doing a human sacrifice, like the people were, like they know, but they just don't know. What's hidden is the ET element, probably not from, I suspect not from the higher up people.
Okay.
But there's a lot of lower people who just don't need that information, and I don't know, no one else could see him, and they were focused on the other like god thing they wanted to talk to.
Okay.
And I got kicked out of my body, and I just was watching. It's really
Okay.
So that would happen a lot, and they would use like drugs and hypnosis to help get into that state, a trance state. Not always, but sometimes.
Yes. Do you remember how you got the drugs? How they gave that to you?
I remember like sometimes I was given like a milkshake, sometimes it was just like an injection. When I was older, it's like an injection. Sometimes it was like medicine, like cough medicine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember actually, like, as I got older, I worked out. So what started happening though was I started like not being able to do that channeling thing they wanted me to do because I couldn't handle that energy. I remember just passing out from like trying to channel this dark being. It was just too low and you know, that would get me like punished or whatever. But I actually remember trying to protect myself by working out, like, oh, if I can't do it, if I'm sick, if I'm sick, then I don't have to do this. So sometimes I could kind of pretend to faint or something.
Smart.
But yeah.
Would that get you out of it?
Pardon?
Would that get you out of it?
Sometimes, but it wouldn't get me out of the punishment later.
Okay.
But that part of me just really wanted to try to protect me.
Right.
So yeah, so the satanic ritual element was kind of that, and it was this matriarchal thing, and it looked like on a day-to-day, it looked like going to the church at night, or going to the underground base that I mentioned at night, or having a night where the like pedophiles are over, or I was taken to like the bowling club or the golf club or wherever, and basically prostituted. And yeah, and I remember just being treated like an object, and I felt so like violated. And that's why I wear this ring now. I wanted to show everyone, it says sacred on it. So because you feel really owned, and so it's a reminder to me that like I belong to me, and that I'm sacred and worthy and cherished, and to treat me with respect.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, this awareness of these things that were happening was not, like Olivia was expressing, like you were expressing, in the day-to-day life, I would have just looked like a kid going to school, going to church, going to youth group. We went to camps too. I wanted to tell you, I went to like family camp. You know how you had your cabin in the woods?
Yeah.
We went to this like camp regularly with my immediate family and my extended family, but all the extended family was involved too. And it was just a camping place where you would do like the climbing thing and go bike riding and blah blah blah. But you know, as the memories start coming back, I have this awareness of actually doing a lot of the physical training, like the fighting training that was a part of the mkultra or Monarch thing. Mm-hmm. in that area.
Okay. Interesting that you had the camps too.
Yeah, and it's just, you know, this, again, like this is how they get away with it. It's like, whoa, they're just going on a family holiday. This is just a family campsite.
Nothing to see here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was whoa to realize, but it made sense. And because that's the other part of the mkultra thing is on the one hand, I was being trained with the psychic stuff, and they were studying me as well and doing the experiments. You talked about the tones, like I had that too as well. Mm-hmm. I remember like they'd play a really painful tone and want to know my reaction and change it around, and there'd be these people behind a glass, like behind a, you know, fully what you'd expect, like you're being in this room being sort of observed and studied.
Right.
Like a whole setup.
Yep.
And then, yeah, so that was going on. And yeah, as I said, the pedophilia at home, and it was just, you know, all the programming was happening a lot with the satanic people. There was a particular, there was two particular like owners or trainers that I had, and one was my dad and one was another man. I also had like a separate trainer for like fighting, and learning to fight and things like that, and like these more sciencey doctor guys at the camp, the Navy base, the underground base place.
Okay.
But yeah, and it was like the other guy was training my dad to know how to manage my programming. Like that's what they do, is they train each other and they pass the techniques and things. And then it's sort of like in exchange, I was like sold to this man for his like, it wasn't just pedophilia, he was like sadistic, just likes to be a psychopath with children. And yeah, so that was happening. And the programming, though, that's what I wanted to say, is like, when we mention program, just for everyone who's watching, what we're talking about is basically trying to instill a belief or a set of behaviors or all of the above to make a person a certain way. And they do that, and that's achieved through pretty much dissociation or hypnosis, which you could argue is sometimes a kind of dissociation. Because that puts the mind and your energy into a very just susceptible kind of mode.
Right.
And the other helpful thing, if they do the trauma-based mind control, the trauma-based programming, where they torture you enough or whatever, that you do dissociate, and then they instill so-and-so belief, is that you will then suppress that experience like we talked about.
Right.
So that's really helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find that they studied you to figure out like where your weaknesses were?
I think so. I think what I remember is just being studied to like train to achieve. Like there was this feeling of like they had a lot riding on me, and like a lot of like she's like, because, and that's the other part of this, is that I'm aware that there was genetic manipulation to intentionally create a very sensitive and psychic person.
Right.
So I more just remember the like training to like not fail, and to achieve, and the experiments, and just they were wanting to advance the skills.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm sure they probably did what you said as well. Like that makes sense.
Yeah, because I felt like they knew exactly what a kid could handle and what they couldn't based on their type. And so it's like they knew what to do to kind of control that type. Like a very sensitive person doesn't need very much to be a trauma.
Mm-hmm. Whereas I think with me, they took it too far, because I ended up like going past what I could handle, because I ended up sort of having that passing out and not being this sort of star channel that they were wanting, which is sort of further along in my story, in part how I was let go, or sort of, that's the wrong word, but so for me, like when they would do the programming, or they would do the torture or the rape or whatever, I would fight. Like I wasn't compliant. Like I was many times, like I was definitely compliant many times to survive, but there was a lot of times where I was fighting.
Good.
And they obviously didn't like that. And I would also fight like energetically with my magic. Like I remember they were trying to do a program on me, and I was saying in my head, and I was like 8, and I was pushing myself into my heart, and I was saying, I am love, I am love, I am love, against what they were saying and wanting me to believe.
Nice.
And I remember shooting out kind of this like energy field from my heart, and I remember feeling like, okay, like I have to not tell anybody, and like I'm just going to do this thing, and they don't know, haha. And and it was effective. I think that's in part why I was able to keep like fighting and be resistant.
Right.
And that's the risk, we were talking about in an email. I think like that's the risk that they run when they take these sensitive, magical children and try to like own them.
Exactly. And then
to access that ability, you have to access your power a little bit.
Right. Whoops. Right. And then to think that they can develop these children psychically, and that those children aren't going to psychically remember later, is hubris.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing that gets in their way.
Hubris, 100%. That is their downfall. And I remember meeting people like this now, and it's like just the ego. I mean, they're intolerable to be around.
Yeah, and these people who are in these groups, they see themselves as like gods, or if not that, like the servants of gods, like the holy, for lack of a better word.
Right.
Above everyone else, separate from everyone else. Everyone else is kind of just like cattle, which is why there's part of why they're so disconnected.
Yeah.
It's trained into them, I'm sure, when they're children too.
Of course. Right. Just superiority. There was always like a special thing, like a thing with being special. Always a thing when I was a kid. Did you have that too?
I remember having the feeling of, like, as I said, like that I had to achieve, but also that I had like this higher role, and like I was going to be like the priestess of the branch, because it's kind of like networks, like, like a business, like you've got little branches, and then there's like the head office, so to speak, and that's kind of how they ended up all over the world. Everybody, like, it's just like that. And they wanted me to be in this kind of medium high position. And I remember feeling like I'm really powerful, and I'm really like, and stuff. And like kind of in the cult, when you're in it, you do have parts of you that are compliant, as I said, to survive. And to survive in the cult, in satanic cult groups, you have to be, there's a hierarchy, and you want to be as high as you can, because the higher you go, the less you're tortured. It's like, okay,
right.
Yeah. So to do that, you have to be like really good at your job or whatever your role is, really like compliant, really in agreement with the beliefs, really like. So what I'm saying is, there was a thing about like being a bit authoritative. Yeah. As well.
Right.
Because that would impress my owner and keep me safe from punishment.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah. And if I succeeded with the psychic stuff too, if I was doing a good job. And because it's when I wouldn't do a good job, they killed my cat, they killed my fish, they tortured my sibling, like. Yeah. So the children are kind of just put in no choice.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what was happening. And then, I wanted to share about as I got older and I was fighting and everything, as I got bigger, I could fight a bit better probably. And I also got angrier. And I ended up just full on rebelling. Like when they wanted me to do certain things, I used to say yes, and I just would say, no, I'm not doing that. Like, you're going to have to kill me or torture me. I don't care like how much you torture me, whatever. Yeah. I'm not doing that. And then they tried to like torture and punish that out of me. And it didn't really work. Yeah. And then they kind of had this realization that this was like a failed project, me. So now we have to, like, what you experience, cover up or let go or whatever we need to do. And so it's the same as what you were sharing. Up till like 15 in my normal life, I was like really social and was good at school and things like that. And then around 16 and so on, I just started getting really like depressed, and I started like having all these arguments with my boyfriend at the time, and I would just be in my room like shaking and crying, not understanding why, or thinking it was about this surface situation, like maybe something happened, but not realizing that the level that you're feeling is like trauma, and that's not normal,
and it's not quite matching the outer circumstance.
Yeah. But that's been your whole life though, you just these intense feelings because of trauma. You're just like, oh. I was just the over emotional friend in my circle.
Me too. I'm just really sensitive.
Yeah. It's like, oh no, because every time I feel sad, I'm getting triggered into feeling my entire sadness that I've been carrying around from trauma.
Exactly.
So yeah, I was rebelling and fighting, and then they were like, we gotta do something, and I started to kind of fall apart after that. I still I just wasn't functioning. And then I don't know, it took me a long time. This is where it kind of moves into my healing and how I got my memories back as well. So that was around when I was like 16 or 18 or something. And then, I think I was still being like hurt and raped and things by my dad for a while there. But I don't know, my role in the group and all of that kind of wasn't happening anymore. And I know that because it was like a failure for my owners, it's like an embarrassment to them if their project fails and they lose their position in the hierarchy.
Okay.
So he had like all this, even more like anger and rage at me as well, and took that out on me.
Okay.
But meanwhile, like you were sharing, I'm living this like normal-ish life. And just like going to work at my part-time job and wondering why I'm like having an anxiety attack, and wondering why at 16 I got anorexic and then bulimic and like just all those different things. I think they do have eating disorder program or like alcoholism program, and that's why so many survivors end up with the same thing.
The same stuff, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah. Oops. So yeah, then I was just kind of lost for a long time. For a few years I was just kind of lost and having this depression, and I thought I had bipolar disorder at one point, which sort of makes sense, if you think about the ups and downs of what is just trauma triggers.
Right.
But there was no trauma, so
exactly. Nothing.
When the psychologist does the evaluation,
right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
They were like, have you experienced trauma? I was like, no.
It's just yeah.
So doing that, and then what happened was eventually I started reconnecting to my spirituality and my gifts because I came across this book. I was doing an animal course at a little college, like to do vet nursing, and I came across this book in the animal section of the library that was how to communicate with animals, and I was like, oh, animal communication, like that's cool, like thinking it'd be about whale noises, but it was about like psychic animal communication, telepathy. And I was just like, and I just absorbed myself into it, and I was like, whoa. And that started this whole like reawakening into like spirituality and reading lots of different things, and just like it all just resonating so much but not quite knowing why. And then when I practiced the exercises, it was like really easy for me, and I was like, what?
Right.
Like why
Feel familiar.
Yeah, and I was like, this book says it should take me longer to like be able to telepathically talk to my guide,
right?
But I think they're saying something right now. It's so weird because I was like clairaudient and just didn't, all the intuition things, I thought it was just my thoughts in my head. That's the one way that it was kind of confused.
Right, because it was so normal.
Yes.
And they were very careful about never saying the word psychic. Never talking about being intuitive or psychic. Like I never knew.
Yeah. In your family, around you?
Definitely in my family too, but even in like the programs, they would never call it anything.
Right. Well, because that would reveal too much.
It would have given me some power, right? And and so I thought that was an interesting.
And that's the thing that people need to realize is when this is happening to like children, you're not thinking like, oh, I'm in a psychic program or I'm doing magic, you're just thinking like, oh, there's an adult telling me to like read this book or to focus on this thing and to levitate it. Okay. Like,
Exactly.
they've got no reference for it to being odd or anything. So, you know, this is again, like, I like to address why I like to point out how they get away with it so they can get away with it less.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to make sense of survivor stories where it's like, you know, to other people in my life from that time period, they would be like, I never saw any of this. And I'll be like,
oh,
that's because.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's because we didn't really see it either.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know what to say. Like, so this is the other thing that happens is like I start getting, when I look back at my life with the frame, like we talked about earlier, having the frame, I was like waking up with bruises every night. And I just thought, oh, I must be like knocking my legs on the edge of the bed or something. And then I would have really strange, chaotic LSD type dreams. And I would just think, oh, and I would just tell my friends, like, it's this funny dream that I had, and I would be the funny dream person. But it was because I was being given LSD as part of the programming.
Interesting.
To like help fool my mind for whatever they wanted to instill.
Right.
And then, you know, another really creepy thing that makes sense now is that my dad had in their room, they had, I don't know what to call them, but like, you know, people keep like insects or insects in like glass containers, and they kind of make it this ornament.
Yeah.
Right? My dad had 2 monarch butterflies.
Okay.
In these glass containers. One for me and one for my sibling. I understand now.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But like at the time, it was just like this thing. And, you know, I would also get like disturbing images of like torture or being raped or something come into my head. And I would just be like, oh, I'm watching too much like Law and Order. Like,
right. Exactly. Always like playing it off and always self-doubt.
Yeah, because you don't have the reference point for something so insane to be.
Exactly. So denial is just really the easiest thing.
Yeah, and it's not even active denial. It's just like there's nothing else. So yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So these are things I've realized, and then as I gradually was reconnecting with my spirit over the next few years, and I started to do sort of inner child work or various like little spiritual healing exercises here and there.
Yeah.
I kind of started to there was one time where I was doing this magical thing, healing thing, and then I got this flash of like being raped by my dad or something. And I was like, why am I thinking this? Like, this is, oh my God, this is so disturbing. No. And I kind of got freaked out, and I just didn't do anymore for a while.
Right.
And I just sort of thought it was really weird, and that's all. And then the way I got my memories back and healing started was that I was at like a retreat doing an emotional healing, learning a technique from this mentor person. And I was sitting there doing this exercise that wasn't even that technique. It was just this basic kind of presence exercise that we were doing. And I got a flashback. It just happened. And my whole body and everything emotionally, I had this image of like this little girl being hurt at this, you know, place that I sort of recognized. And then of like the flooding and the panicking. And I just started hyperventilating and crying and basically had a flashback at this retreat.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. And then from then on, it was like the door was opened. It was like the lid was off.
Exactly.
And I just started getting like fragments coming up just when I wasn't trying, or whenever I would try to do a healing something, it would come up. And yeah. And then I had a really bad time with healing. We were talking about, you know, how
Yeah.
you were in your strength when you arrived at that point. I was just so, like, I was getting there, but I was still kind of disconnected, I think, from like my heart, because I was still kind of unsafe, because I was unaware of the unsafety that I had been in. I wasn't safe yet. I wasn't away from all of it.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I ended up having a really difficult 2 years after that. I had to figure out how to get away from these people, how to do it in a secret way where I wasn't going to be caught and like punished or anything, which may or may not have happened given my, like, the way they kind of let me go, but I just wasn't taking any chances.
For sure. So you did get away. You got away, like you like physically removed yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, I had to totally disconnect from all family, anyone who's associated with that period in my life or those areas, the location,
Okay.
blocked and deleted and disconnected from everybody
Wow.
because there's just so much risk. So
Right. Right.
I couldn't be safe and stay there.
Right.
So then I went through a big period of like loss and grief for that.
Right.
And at the same time having these memories come up, and the healing I was doing was not actually healthy, I think, but I didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
I was so like flooded with so much suffering that I was so desperate to be feeling better. I was so desperate to feel better that I wasn't listening to my higher heart, and my guides, I'm sure, were trying to tell me, like, you know, choose a different path. And I had people around me sort of telling me, like, this is the way to do it.
Mm.
So I got really lost for a while there. And then things started to get better when I found like a really good therapist, who's got, you know, a lot of skills with the complex trauma side of things. And ever since then, I've just kind of been healing and healing.
Yeah. So, wow. Yeah. So you had to go just no contact with everybody.
Yeah, because like, if you look at my story, I'm like going all over to the different towns and stuff. There were teachers that were involved in the abuse. There were police officers who were part of this pedophile ring, for example.
Right.
So, and you know, that's the way. After that period, I have this healing book by this great author who writes self workbooks for ritual abuse survivors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Alison Miller, if anyone wants to check her out.
Yes, I have read one of her books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And in her book, she talks about how that's a really common thing, that kind of, you know, the doctor is involved, and this, you know, at least a couple of school teachers are involved, you know, the family friend, blah, 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 with the satanic ritual abuse families and that side of things. So, and she says, like, you know, there's usually a fake therapist that they set up for you to go to in case you realize.
Yes.
So you just had to disconnect from anybody and everybody.
As soon as I turned 18, I went as far away as I could go.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go no contact, but I had physically removing myself was one of the best things that I did. I just energetically.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So your healing process was really like the working with your psychic gifts and then during your regressions. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, and working with my psychic mentor. You know, I fell in love. Like I was like, I would say I was lost like my entire 20s. It's like, if you knew me in my 20s, I'm sorry, you know that. So, but then once I felt, I even moved to Germany for a year, and I actually think that distance put also kind of just snapped some cords somehow. I can't really explain it. And then I moved back, and fell in love, and that it opened up this energy. I can't really explain it. It opened up my heart in a way that I was incapable of accessing before. And after that happened, I just started saying yes to all kinds of things. And so I kept hearing about, you know, the psychic. So I went to her and would ask her, like, did I have MKUltra? You know, like, just point blank. And working with someone, so she was basically, I was in therapy too. And especially in my 20s, like earlier with the eating disorder, but I was working with her as a therapist, essentially.
Yeah.
And then I had I even had a session with Gigi Young, you know, very early on when she was doing sessions, and was just kind of like, I just need therapy. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And so I was just drawn to self-work. It was like constant. It was like, it turned into almost like a full-time job. Like, I even went a period not working very much. Like, I would just work on the weekends because I just had so much I needed to do on myself.
Yeah. It's like a full-time job. Recovering from this,
It
you
really
know,
is.
or developing, you know, you have to jump such a gap that sort of, you know, for lack of a better way of putting it, other people don't have to, in that you've had so much damage happen.
Exactly. And so I find it's like people with this, or people with lots of trauma, it's like they need to take breaks from work, from just the rat race, and society is not set up for healing.
No, it's not.
You know, it's set up like against this process. So it's almost like if we're kept in a perpetual anxiety, in a perpetual motion, it's hard to really deep dive into those emotional places that I needed to go, and to really just get the support that I needed, because none of it was mainstream. And I was so full of self-doubt and all of that. So I was just always pushing against that. And I even remember I still work with anxiety, doing readings and doing, you know, psychic work. I will still just sometimes just like a flop sweat, and why, you know, and it's a fear of failure. And why? Like, my ego is not that invested. So that took years of psychic reading to get over before I could even think about doing it for other people. Right. And so that was part of my process, though. I was really only doing that to heal myself, I would say.
That's beautiful.
Would you say the same?
Well, for the healing stuff?
Yeah. And
well,
work and
so as I said, like, things were really, really difficult. I was in an extreme amount of suffering because of the loss that had happened, the disconnect that had to happen as well. And then having to deal with this and not having the right support. I was doing things where I felt like, I thought that kind of being present with my feelings, I was flooding myself with the trauma. I was doing too much too soon, kind of. Too much too fast, and flooding myself and thinking that if I just feel it, I heal it, you know, but getting that wrong. You know, that's not the way you're supposed to do it. Not what I did in that time. So, because, you know, when you have a lot of trauma, you know, just for everyone's sake, you have to kind of dip your toe into the feelings, rather. You have to, therapists call it titration, just stay in your window of tolerance and all these other terms for a very good reason. So you're grounded and your body can actually process what's moving through you. If it's overwhelming, you just snap back into the dissociation mechanism again to cope with what you're feeling, which is what you did back then. So I was really in that. And then, you know, I had multiple periods where I had one period where I tried to kill myself. Like, I just was so trying, because what I got into was trying to fix it really hard, like trying to fix everything so hard and fix myself, and doing healing under the guise of like, I'm healing and this is what I should do and I'm going to love myself. But actually there was a lot of resistance and non-acceptance of myself and the reality and the feelings and all of it. It's like doing healing to get away from the pain. but I kind of didn't quite have that insight. So I was just doing it, and then I kept hitting these crisis points of like, I'm just going to kill myself. I can't cope with this. Because what happens too as a survivor, and you might have experienced too, or maybe you didn't because you had more of a light container that you were in, I don't know. But when you try to heal, there's programming set up to stop you from doing that. There's programming, like, you know, to make you, you know, have an eating disorder or whatever. To when you try to go within, there is defense mechanisms that are set up. Like, I had one where I couldn't talk. I would just go mute. And when because you're not allowed to talk to a therapist, you're not allowed to tell anybody.
Right.
And it's so instilled into like your body memory and your kind of unconscious that runs our show. I had to learn to move through that. But so when I was healing and doing so much healing, I didn't know it, but I was kind of activating a lot of programming that was exacerbating the problem, which doesn't happen if you go slower and you're more steady and careful. You can kind of weave around it and actually help the part of you that's reacting in defense and still doing that job of keeping you away from what you're not supposed to remember.
Right. That's a really good point.
Yeah. So not knowing that and not having an experienced therapist or whatever yet that has this background in this type of like trauma-based mind control.
Right, which that is a rabbit hole, a can of worms on its own. Finding a therapist that knows how to deal with this and that is involved in this.
Yeah.
So it's amazing that you found one.
Yeah, it took a long time. I was about to give up when I found her.
Wow.
But yeah, so I got into these really strong points of suffering, and then I ended up having awakenings on the other side of that because so one night I had this really bad torture memory coming up as like flashback and body memory for a few days, and it was torture to relive because I'm being tortured, and now I'm being tortured by like the flashback of it.
Right.
And I know all the techniques and things I was trying to make it better or whatever were not working. And so I was essentially being tortured by this experience of being electroshocked over and over for days. And nothing I was doing was working. So that was instilling more of like, nothing works. I can't fix this. I'm never gonna, that's where I was. It's like, I'm never gonna heal. Like this is, and no one could help me. The spiritual healers I was working with felt overwhelmed.
Right.
And were like, you know, trying to help, but it just wasn't quite right. And I ended up having this night where I was really feeling that, and I was in so much pain and suffering and resistance within that I ended up having like a kind of like ego breakdown, or what's the word, ego death, where I just had this awareness chime in of like, if I keep believing my thoughts, like I'm going to die, because that's what was happening to make me want to like kill myself or whatever.
Right.
So if I want to live through this night, I have to stop believing this, and I have to stop, and I have to believe something different. I have to believe that it will get better. That was the first time I'd really ever done that with such like power and strength. And when that happened, the next day, and I realized that it worked, I was like, oh my God. And I had such a strong awareness. I got everything. I got that our thoughts are just stuff, and that our emotions are just stuff. I got that my focus I can choose my focus and my belief. And I was pulled into, I had this really strong kind of enlightenment-y experience for a few days where I was pulled into I can just say I was pulled into the sacred. I was so like in the now that I wasn't in my mind. I was just this beingness, and like seeing that everything was God.
Yeah.
That was, and that experience, and a couple other things with like a heart awakening that happened where I saw that everything was love. That's really how I ended up doing the work that I do now and the spiritual development, because that's when I realized, like, okay, I have to stop believing these thoughts. I have to stop doing this, what I thought was healing these attempts aren't working. I just surrendered, and I actually pushed me into, like, I give up healing this. I can't. There was one night I was on my knees and I was like crying, and I was like to spirit or whoever, like, I can't fix this. Like, I give up. And then I kind of was like, what do I know that I need? All I know is that I need love. And then I just I was like, okay, I give up. And then I started generating this love from my heart. And I was like, whoa, something's happening. and then I started blooming this love, and I started having another awakening of, like, oh, like, about how the answer is love. And then this angel, she came to me, and she said, I had this idea in my head that, oh, if I follow the path of love, I got to follow what feels like love. Oh. And then this angel came and she said, if you follow the path of love, you will heal. And I was like, so this is kind of my healing process. And then from then on, it's just developing more of the love and the sacred and the disidentification and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's like both of us had to have this heart opening.
Yeah.
This extreme, like, heart opening experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really, that's, and that's why my message now is that it's love that kind of heals. It's the heart. That's the development and the healing. Like, if we want to shortcut everything,
Right.
just go to your heart.
Right. Because it's almost like the processing is never ending. The forgiveness is like never ending. Like, these things, you can't really, like, you can't force it. And I did the same thing where I was just trying to kind of force it and just trying to, do it really quickly and just get through it in a way to keep from feeling it, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I just really had to focus on the heart, like, almost gratitude. And because sometimes I couldn't quite reach, an unconditional love state. I'd had a state like you experience, not for days, but for like an evening. And that was like, okay. And mine was at Vipassana, this meditation retreat. You're silent and you meditate for 10 days. But I don't think, I feel like I could have been in talk therapy for years and talked about this for years and still would have just been spinning my wheels, because that's really what I needed.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is like, talk therapy, it's so good to have that support person. And a lot of I would say the coping skills that they have for, like, post-traumatic stress symptoms and things are really helpful and useful.
Yeah, definitely.
But as far as, like, really, like, I guess what we might be talking about is, like, sort of doing the energy transformation, like the alchemy of, like, moving the energy and blooming and strengthening the new energy that you prefer, like that sort of stuff. It's not included. And that's why
it's like in the mental, like, we understand it and we have coping mechanisms which are necessary, but then taking it into, like, how are we different people? Like, how do we actually get rid of the anger, change the personality for the better? Like, the deeper essence of what I went through. That was through my guides, through the heart. And I would even say I had outside assistance. I mean, I definitely had outside assistance in many ways. So.
From your mentor person?
From what?
Your outside assistance from your mentor person?
Well, I would say from my higher self.
Oh, yeah.
My guides. And then from, just being, and there was it was almost like a future self also that was like, okay. And it started with, like, I would just kind of say yes to everything. Like, if someone told me about something, if someone told me about a book, I'd buy it. I'd read it. If someone told me about someone, I would go see them. Like that, I got into this, it was kind of like an open-hearted thing where I would just say yes to everything, and that really sped things up. And I would go in and out of that, right? I couldn't hold that for too long because trust was obliterated. Like I was terrible at trust. So I was really just faking it, honestly. Like I was like, I'm really just faking it till I make it, but I'm just saying yes to everything because the trust wasn't there. But then after I did these things, the trust came online.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I resonate so much because
Yeah.
that's what happened with me is like, you know, the reason that I was like forcing it initially and trying to like I was trying to solve my pain because I felt so out of control and consumed, and I had no sense of trust for anything to hold me in it. It's about control.
Right.
And that's why like the remedy was the surrender, and what you're talking about, I might speak as like flowing with life, which is literally like a practice that I do now, and I can confirm it speeds things up so much. I was like, whoa, ascension. Like it really, if you just keep saying yes to spirit, and which is reflected in your life, like that's one of my kind of teachings now is like something that helped me is like to feel in life where life is saying yes and I'm still saying no, you know, if that's like areas of your life like relationships or like your career or just some event you're going to or not going to, whatever. And then sort of feel for like, okay, if I'm saying no, but this keeps happening, like I have to say yes. And when you do that, you actually start to flow with life. And that was the medicine that I needed to be able to move with all the suffering, the trauma still there, but without the resistance. I could actually flow and say, you have to say yes for healing, regarding healing. We have to say yes to our, you know, an emotion that comes up or a fragment of a memory that comes up.
Right.
And even though it's scary, you have to say yes. And I would start saying to myself, like, it's just a wave when I would meet with it.
Right.
And then, yeah, and when you say yes, like what you're talking about, I just love that because my experience of doing that is that life gets really magical really quickly.
Right.
Like your synchronicities, because you're so like, I was having like almost creepy things happen with like the synchronicities, like the TV, there's the characters on the show, and I would have this thought about something, and then they would say what I would just thought.
Yes.
Like weird things like that, and I was
Yeah.
like, whoa. And it was the TV was talking about being in the flow, and when I was thinking about writing my book, it was like, and then the character's writing a book, like.
Right.
So yeah, I just share that because I really feel like this flowing with what arises and saying yes to life that you're talking about. And if we're on the topic of healing, it really is about just honoring that everything is a wave, and that unfoldment process is so beautiful, and that's exhilaration, because I think that that's you following your heart, and your life is the expression of your higher self when you let it to be.
Right, exactly. That's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. And I like it, and I like what you said. It's about like saying yes. You can even say yes to the memories. Like if you're getting something, even if you're like, I don't think that's right, no, that can't be, like saying yes to it and then just kind of letting it go can help it, rather than, I have found working with people like staying in resistance to memories trying to come in actually starts to create more problems. And they would say oftentimes it would manifest physically for them. But if they, you know, the clients that were like, okay, I'm just gonna even just pretend like, okay, this is real for a week, you know, and just play with it.
Yeah.
Me too.
I think that's
kind of just like, okay, well, let's play with this and see what happens.
And that's the best thing to do. It's more of an, I suppose, kind of more of a neutral. You're not being like, yes, I believe it 100%. You're not being like, no, you know.
You're not in resistance and you're not pushing.
Yeah, and that's what we want to do, and that's what's going to help you just for everyone watching, that's what's going to help you access the truest truth, you know, because that's the position almost of non-attachment, right?
Exactly.
When our attachment gets activated, that's when, you know, the filters or whatever can sometimes come in or whatever.
Right. The biases, the filters, whatever, you know. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So, so the healing stuff, it I think it does really come back to love. Like, I should add that when I was young and I was doing those love exercises, and I was like 7 when they were trying to hurt me and things like that. This is how I knew that love is the remedy and love is the answer, and that our power is love. That the power of love is stronger than this great darkness that is coming up for you know, awareness in our collective right now.
Absolutely.
Because I was able to use it to live through such horror. And then it's where your power is from, and it diffuses anything else. Like, it's only effective if we are in fear, or if we are in resistance, or if we respond.
Exactly. That's why they have to push everyone into fear.
Yeah.
Because everyone is so naturally powerful, and love is so much more powerful than fear. So there's just so much of a push to go down into fear, because that's not our natural state, and it's so weak. Fear is energetically weak. And so I remember being a kid with the student teacher, and she was saying something to the class to try to kind of get everyone thinking about like a car wreck or something just randomly weird. And I remember knowing what she was doing and coming in with like this energy of, it was innocent, you know, so it had innocence, but it was also love. And I said something else, like I changed it into a joke, and I rewrote the story. Like, she was talking about this car wreck, and I like changed the scenario, and the whole class laughed. And I remember her face. She was like it just fell.
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking like, okay, that really was easy. Like, that was not, but most people, it's like, that's where the mind control comes in, right? People are entrained into staying in this low frequency because it's where everyone else is, right? It's where society is.
And they don't realize that, like, your heart power and your love power is something that can, like, is a thing and can, like, help you with that. So they can't have a reference that is stronger, that there's anything to do. But it really is. And it doesn't take that, you know, you just reroute a little story and that fear is resolved because it's so weak. Exactly. It doesn't take a lot. Like, you don't have to be totally pure or whatever.
Exactly. Exactly. It's perfection. It's not, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to, you know, achieve a bunch of stuff in order to be able to do this.
I wanted to tell people about the, you know, this ability of love that there is versus fear, and the weakness of that fear that you were describing. Because, and a good example, I tell this to, like, you know, my clients who are worried about like psychic protection and things like that. It's my little way to help people feel a bit better, I think. Is that, like, so one night, not even that long ago, I was sleeping and I was in that kind of half lucid dreaming, astral traveling zone where you're conscious but you're not fully back in your body yet. It's weird. But there was this, like, I think it was like a gray being. It was that shape and kind of hands and fingers and stuff. And it was like just trying to touch my head. And I didn't really stick around to figure out what it was doing. But, you know, it was probably trying to get some information or something. And so first I freaked out, and I sort of inside in this astral moment, I started kind of crying and freaking out. And then another sort of part of me was like, oh no, I know what to do here. Okay. And then I just started saying, like, I am love, I am love, I am love, I am love. And then all it took for me to basically vibrate out of range of that gray being, he was gone. Kind of looked to me like he was gone. It looked to me like he when beings enter and leave a room, I see like this scatter pattern, like graininess. And
Yeah.
he just kind of graininess scatter patterned away. It just dissipated.
Right.
But really it was probably more like I increased my frequency, that I was no longer in that point of range.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to share that with people, because it's like I was still feeling, you know, I still had that fear, and like it was still kind of there.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't take very much of love energy to kind of at least make me safer. And
Yeah.
that's the power of it. It's just like, you don't have to be like this pure being or know what you're doing psychically, you
Right.
know, you just, you know, remember that you're a spirit of love. Just remember.
I love that.
And that's all I was doing when I was young, and the people were trying to do programming and stuff was, you know, this memory of my spirit guide. I started doing this practice of connecting to my heart when they would try to do things, because my spirit guide, this Pleiadian being who's so beautiful, she came to me and she said, you stay alive in here. She pointed to my heart. And that's when I knew, like, okay, I'm going to do that. And I also was like this kid, like I remember walking around my house, like I remember looking at like all the darkness and everything in my house, and I was like 8 or maybe, and I was like, if people could just remember love, then we would all be okay. Like I remember having this feeling and this awareness, like if everyone just needs love, like, and I was so confused by the darkness, and I was confused by like why people couldn't get that.
Yeah.
And then I think that's my soul's mission, is having been on this love mission.
Right.
And that medicine of love.
Yeah. You can't really go through like what we've been through without having that mission, you know?
Yes, yeah. I really feel like the people that go through this type of experience, I mean, everybody's mission is sacred and important. But I know for at least me, for my higher self, the memories I have before incarnating, I was more like my guides call it like an emissary.
Yes.
And they call me like a love emissary.
Yes.
And I remember looking at the planet and looking like my children have forgotten who they are. And even now, like I feel like I get emotional, like I had so much love, and I was like, they have forgotten who they are. We need to. And then I remember the process of, I think, incarnating or densifying or both, and just taking on these layers of pain that it was like putting on a heavy robe, one by one, and I could feel myself getting denser and denser, and it was like I wanted to take the cries of my children and transform it into love intentionally. And I feel like that's, you know, it's not just me that's doing that in these, when you have this life experience, there's, I just resonate with what you said, that you go into the darkest shadow of humanity, because on the higher dimensional levels, like your soul is on a mission to free humanity.
Right. Yeah.
And you're right. Like it's that strength that you carry, that medicine that you carry.
Right. Because it's a medicine carried by experience.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just in the frequency. It's just there. No one can take that away from us.
Yes. Yeah. And I look at all my healing and the healing that I do now, and after that crisis, and I had to work out how to heal for myself. I see myself, I'm drawing on every past life that I've had as like an alchemist and as like a monk and all these different things. The tools I'm using now, I had those lives to prepare me for this great gift that I wanted to give of transmutation.
Me too. And I remember that, and I remember like seeing all the different, I had a guide show me the different arrays of my different lives and how to contact people that way through this like heart ray.
Yeah.
Oh, and I started by contacting my past lives like that, and past selves. Yeah. And then I recognized all of them. I'm like, oh, I've used all of these. And then going back to like the very first, like before I even came here, like before Lemuria, you know, I remember being called, like there was you know, like Earth called me, you know, like it was a calling to go experience all the lifetimes and then bring healing.
Yeah, I'm gonna start crying because I remember too. And when you're talking about Lemuria and stuff, like that's a life that's really clear for me. And and that call is just that sacred gift of, putting yourself through so much suffering, like just you as Olivia, like I honor that, we came for such a sacred intention, and it's like,
thank you,
so beautiful to connect here now.
Yeah, it really is. And it's like we've been able to, our hope is, of course, by doing this, that putting ourselves out there, being vulnerable like this, instead of slamming people, the hope is that we can put our voices together. And there's a mutual strength that we can get from other people, knowing, it's validating. It's like, it's filling in pieces of the puzzle. And it's like you're finding almost like a soul tribe, a soul, like an oversoul, like the impulse.
Yeah, and that's that's what I think that I just feel the resonance so strongly. Like I feel like that's what we're supposed to do, is like, if you look at the ascension process that's happening right now, an interpretation that my guides gave me was like the essence of Lemuria is returning. Like it's not Lemuria, but it's those essences of heart living and 5D and all those things. And I feel like the people and the priestesses and the alchemists and everyone of Lemuria are reconnecting, and it's like this full circle.
Right.
Magic. It's a magic.
Yeah.
And we're doing it, and I'm so like, have so many feels, because I feel how this is like the freedom of humanity, like this awareness about the mkultra and the blah blah blah. This is the first time that humanity for so many generations has had that awareness. And like this ascension cycle has been so long coming, and I just feel how we're really doing it. Like humanity is getting freer, even though there's darkness and things. This is the darkness that's always been there, and it's just that the light is making it clearer, and asking it to purify.
The light is like purging. Purgative, it's like it's pushing everything. And we're all feeling it, but it's like we're a microcosm of the macrocosm. It's like we've kind of already been through this. And so now that the world is going through it in a collective sense, I mean, I would even liken it to, soldiers before they go to battle are sometimes brainwashed so that in case they to get taken as a POW, they know the tactics. Right?
Yeah.
So they know how they might get brainwashed. They know the tactics of the enemy, right? Because they've been put through it before. That makes them stronger. And so that's what we are really doing. We've been put through this stuff. So now when it goes live and it's in mass society, we've already seen it. We've already felt it. And we're not susceptible to it anymore.
Yeah. We're like ahead of that. And we have those evolution, what's the word, like the not skills, like the pathways, like the way. The way through.
Yeah, it's like like neural pathways are already like connected.
And I think that's sorry, you go on.
Yeah, well, I mean, but all we're doing is reminding other people that they have this too, that they're doing this too. It really isn't, it really isn't hard. All you really have to do is just remind people that they have this power.
Yes, yeah. And I think that there's the sacred gift of taking on that immense pain body and this trauma of the collective that you and other survivors and I've taken on, is those my guys talk to me about like I came to create a way through, to make it through, so that other beings, it's almost like on a higher level, there's like these energetic pathways that
Right.
now they don't have to dip so heavily into the darkness, because we have sort of carried some of the burden, and we can also, you know, lead in the way if it's in alignment for us. And you know, just that energetic remembrance, that resonance is just felt and received. So just this like magic.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. And I love thinking about how other people won't have to go through this if we did it. Like if nothing else, that makes it worth it. I mean, it can't ever, nothing can really be worth it, but the idea that that is what we're doing, paving the way for beings to make things easier is.
Yes, yeah, I think that that's the role of the emissaries and people in that kind of energetic role, is to make a way through, and to, you know, I know for me it was love and peace, to bring peace. So that resistance and intense suffering that I had, to make my way out of that on my own, just through my own awakening that happened. That's now the teaching that I give, you know, with my clients and things, is that surrender to your spirit, that unfoldment, that remembrance, and everything that you've uncovered is going to be your gift as well.
Right. Exactly.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, just kind of here in closing, I want you to tell everyone where people can find you.
Oh, yes. Yeah, guys, my website is beckluminary.com. So it's BECC. And I think we'll put some links below and things, so you don't have to remember everything. But yeah, you can connect with me to do unfoldment sessions, which is what I call it, where we basically, this heart acceleration that we were talking about earlier, I can support you through that process. And yeah, just surrender and flow to your light and express your light. Yeah, so just my website. I'm also on social medias, you know, just Becc or Becc Luminary. You'll find me on all the things as well. My YouTube channel, offering light language, songs of remembrance, and channelings, and videos like this, and lots of cool stuff and magic.
Awesome.
What about you?
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm oliviaestelle.com as well. So that's YouTube and Facebook. So
cool.
Yeah. And I do readings and regressions.
Yes, and I've experienced a reading and some support from Olivia, and it was really good and beautiful. So everyone go get a reading.
Thank you. You were just magic to work with.
Yes, it's just like magic everywhere at this point.
Yes. Yeah. You know, like when two psychics get together, it's like,
yeah,
the energy just gets really, you can just feel it.
Okay, guys, well, thank you for connecting, and thank you, Olivia.
Thank you so much, Becc. Thank you for sharing. What a blessing.
Okay.
Bye.